The world is currently going through a global crisis. A pandemic caused by a novel coronavirus has spread around worldwide, infecting at this point over 2 million people, and it has killed more than 100,000 since being discovered in December of 2019. Originating in the Wuhan district of China, it has been dubbed COVID-19, although many people simply call it the coronavirus, even though there are many other versions of the coronavirus. These are generally the facts that most can agree on, and these are the only facts that people can seem to agree on. It's been in the media's eye since at least the middle of March, and different people and different governments have had vastly different reactions to the virus. It's quite clear that many people claim to have an answer, but really have no clue what the hell they're talking about. In the meantime, we've been dealing with mass panic, extreme government actions, and all manner of conspiracies cropping up, such as people attacking 5G towers because they're very desperate for an answer. Let's talk about people before we talk further about the disease. It's important in this context to understand people, to understand the reaction to the disease. A pandemic is something that can be called a perfect problem, and I mean perfect in the sense of a perfect storm, a detrimental situation arising from a combined, unique set of circumstances. A pandemic is not like a war. With war, people can pull out and end the situation at almost any time. A disease pandemic has an uncertain end, and the theories on when it might be over are wildly different. And that's another problem. Very little about the potential damage of the situation is certain. Predictions are all over the board, and of course, there's no way to solve this problem without being unscathed in one way or the other. There is no magic bullet. This is a situation in which there is no absolutely right answer. There are objectively bad and wrong answers that will inevitably lead to disaster, but there is no answer that will not lead to some kind of harm in the future. And anyone who says otherwise is deluded or peddling snake oil. None of these issues play well with human psychology. Humans like certainty, and they have trouble assigning value to risk, especially if they're trying to compare apples to oranges. In this particular situation, it's economic risk versus medical risk, in which everyone's comparison is completely different and opinionated. Throughout this situation, I have grown many frustrations. I have a feeling that this pandemic is going to be a very defining moment of my life, for better or for worse. I feel that this situation has made me a lot more misanthropic. To put it bluntly, desperate or anxious people become stupid. Stupid people are annoying, and the quantity of stupidity and short-sightedness is vastly overwhelming the demand. As George Carlin once said, imagine how stupid the average person is. Now imagine that half of them are stupider than that. Just so there's complete transparency, let me tell you exactly where I am on this whole situation. I'm from a state that has one of the highest case totals in the country. In my current city, there have been cases in the higher double digits, and there's been at least one death in my own city. However, on the other side of the coin, I've had friends and family either lose their job or need to quit to avoid risking the rest of my family. I've had friends and family fall into even darker places than that. Out of respect for privacy, I'd like to avoid the specifics, but do note that they get quite dark. However, through much of the situation, I'm not afraid as many people are. I'm not worried, I'm not anxious. My emotions have been anger and disgust, as people have been desperately clamoring to try and solve a problem that they just can't, throwing whatever they can at the problem, even if it has no chance of actually working. The extreme short-sightedness is some of the most infuriating things that I've ever seen in my life. I'm going to be completely blunt. A man in the United States was arrested for paddle boating by himself. That broke social distancing rules. A man in the UK was arrested by being on his own front lawn. People were arrested on a bus for not wearing any masks, in an area where there was no mandate to wear a mask. A man was arrested for playing in an empty park with his daughter. A church had a drive-in service where people were socially distancing from within their cars, 6 feet apart, as per social distancing rules. And each of them got a $500 fine. Possibly the most disgusting thing that I've ever heard was frontline workers like doctors losing custody of their kids solely because they are frontline workers, and kids generally aren't at risk due to this coronavirus. No, actually, that's not the most disgusting part. Why I'm becoming so much of a misanthrope lately is because whenever I come across the majority of these stories, the general reaction on the internet is, good, should have stayed inside. You're risking everyone. I wonder how many people are still going to be doctors during this doctor shortage after they learn that their kids are being taken away. But no, this stuff must be done for the public good. This kind of stuff makes me and many others want to say, fuck the public. It's not worth saving. Keep in mind, the majority of these people were working within social distancing protocols, following the law. And in these situations, the authorities have basically decided to break their own social distancing protocols to throw them in a jail cell with many other people, which according to the public understanding of the virus is a death sentence. But then again, for the prisoners' benefit, many of them are being let out and back into public temporarily. It's mostly non-violent offenses. The fact that burglaries have risen astronomically has absolutely nothing to do with that whatsoever. It's just looters. And let's ignore the prisoner who was released, now brought up on murder charges. It's an anecdote. We should also ignore the large rise of firearm purchases that have happened as COVID cases began to skyrocket. We should also ignore people like the governor of Michigan deciding that people can't buy non-essential stuff like home repair equipment, gardening equipment, or things that are clearly stocked right in front of their faces. The protesters are just angry that they can't go motorboating. It's not like some places are facing food shortages, and being able to grow your own stuff is important right now. But no, the police are right. Protesting is clearly a non-essential activity at one of the biggest governmental authoritarian overreaches in the modern era. We should be grateful here in the United States that our mayors aren't threatening to send in the police with flamethrowers, or China literally welding people into their apartments until they starve to death. It's all for the public good. Except that these measures did not halt either of those countries from becoming major epicenters of COVID. The people who are supporting this kind of stuff care about the public good. They are so kind and caring. This is why so many of them sung with glee when Boris Johnson, a world leader who they didn't like, got COVID and hoped that he would die from it as a consequence for being too lax on COVID. After all, that's the way it should be. If you're not paranoid and hiding under your bed, you deserve to die. You deserve to die in your own fluids, and all your family members do as well. I would be more willing to tolerate these attitudes, I guess you can call them, if these people seem to know anything about anything. Some of these people are incredibly short-sighted, and I'm going to say that 95% of them or more are stupid. So let's get into the facts and figures, shall we? A lot of countries and states are beginning to consider opening things back up, and on many of these forums, including the one Reddit is specifically pushing for people to join to get coronavirus news, opening up at any time before a vaccine is good and ready will be the worst idea in history. After all, they say that as soon as the quarantine is lifted, cases will start rising again. Yes, they will. This was always the plan. This is what we signed up for. This was always the intention, and this is what we were told. I'm sorry that you were lied to or were swayed by sloganeering. The quarantine and lockdown measures were never meant to prevent people from getting sick at all. It was never meant to prevent anyone from getting sick at all. You cannot get immunity to a disease that you are not exposed to, and it would be impossible to completely get rid of a disease without putting the world on a time freeze, which we do not have the power to do. The lockdowns had one purpose. They were meant to stop people from getting sick all at once. The only purpose that they had was to stop hospitals from being overwhelmed. That is it. That is the only intention they ever had. No matter how many cute cartoons Google shows you, or how many times you've heard the slogan, flatten the curve. So it'd be really nice if you guys can stop moving the goalposts. And make no mistake, waiting any longer than when the curve is flattened is moving the goalposts past what was originally intended by this. It did buy us time, which allowed us to discover treatments and better ways to care for people who came down with COVID. But to assume that we can stay in lockdown until all this is over is ironically one of the worst and most short-sighted ideas in human history. The most optimistic forecast for a vaccine put the time crunch on 12 to 18 months. That's optimistic. Do you know how long it could take to get a vaccine? A very long time. The more that this disease mutates or gains extra strains, the longer that it will take. If you want to look at, the common cold, they've been trying to make a vaccine for it since the 1950s. It might be impossible to make a vaccine for this. But let's assume that these most optimistic estimates are the ones we get, the ones that are going to come true. Vaccines are not made from nothing. They require raw materials and it takes time to produce them. We can pump out hundreds of millions of vaccines per year, but we have billions of people at this rate who need them. And getting those hundreds of millions assumed that we stop producing other vaccines, such as influenza or measles, the latter of which is more infectious than COVID-19, by the way. And ironically enough, over 100 million children are at risk of missing out on their measles vaccine due to this pandemic. One of the bigger mistakes in the epidemic, made by the powers that be, was the attempts at trying to downplay things for the sake of preventing fear and panic. And I'm talking everyone here, not just the president or whatever. Flatten the curve. It's a cool and catchy slogan, but like many slogans, it only tells half the story. The true story is that we're going to have to flatten the curve many, many times. Optimistically at 12 to 18 months, on and off. And no matter how many cute logos Google makes, that doesn't sound optimistic at all. All downplaying the panic, by the way, was move it around time-wise to when the curtain was finally pulled. I can guarantee that people will not tolerate a second lockdown, no matter how high the cases spike. You're not going to get one, unless you're as authoritarian as China. And I can prove it. There was some drama about medical masks. At the start of this, the CDC and the WHO, and even esteemed professionals like Dr. Fauci, said that the average person should avoid wearing masks. Some of them were honest and said that we needed to save the supplies for the medical professionals. But some of these organizations, professional organizations that we look to for situations like this, stated that the masks have no benefit for people if they were not sick. Of course, the story inverted at some point, when it did become hard to deny that areas that had masks were faring a lot better than those that didn't, provided you were wearing them correctly. Wearing a mask like Chuck Schumer, an elected party leader by the way, won't protect you. Cover your mouth and your nose. Some places did eventually make it a law that you had to wear a mask in public. And not just a self-made one, an actual professional one. Too bad by the time that the news changed, masks were sold out or overpriced, and many people were out of their jobs and couldn't afford one anyway. Good going, guys! So when are you going to drop the hammer on the 6 feet apart thing? You know, since that's based on guidelines from the 1930s, and we've discovered a lot about virology and epidemiology since then. An MIT researcher says that droplets may travel up to 27 feet, not just 6 feet. The counter-argument to this, of course, is that they say that many more people would have to be sick if that were true. How many are we talking on that? We're past 1 million. We're past 2 million. Is it 3 million? Is it 4 million we might eventually hit? How far are we talking here? See, this is what happens when you don't give me the full truth. Now I need to doubt every single thing that you say. By the way, even the current 6 feet standard does not apply to actions like sneezing, coughing, or even talking. 6 feet is too close to talk if you want to avoid risk of infection. So yeah, the only way to truly avoid infection is to stay home forever and ever. I mean, that's what the Hollywood celebrities are saying. I mean, you know, after they got done singing Imagine There's No Heaven.
Imagine there's no heaven.
Imagine there's no countries, yeah.
And no religion too.
Imagine no possessions.
No need for greed and hunger.
It isn't hard to do.
Yeah, no shit, guys.
The way you can fight it is simple, my friends. Just stay the fuck at home.
I mean, it should be really easy. I don't know what's so hard about this. The rest of us have these huge mansions to explore, and we have enough money so we never have to work again. Then again, even having these huge mansions and so much money that they never have to work a day in their life, they're even breaking. What hope do the rest of us have? I mean, it's simple. You've heard the meme. Our grandparents were asked to go to war. We're asked to just stay home and do nothing. Except, scientifically, it's easier to get people to go to war than it is to get them to do nothing. Literally, the only thing you cannot ask a populace to do is nothing. That is just about the only thing that humans will not do. There was a study a few years back. Scientists put people in a room to be alone with their thoughts, and the only thing that they could do to distract themselves was administer themselves with an electric shock. And people, by and large, chose the shock. People would rather experience pain than be alone with their thoughts. It's a good thing that all the sports and movies and entertainment options are canceled, while toys and games are deemed non-essential and can't be purchased. Now we get to see this experiment on a massive scale! If you think that an indefinite lockdown can only save lives and will put no one at danger, I'd advise you to start volunteering at a suicide hotline sometime soon. Remember what I said earlier? Gun sales have risen through all of this. Well, calls to suicide hotlines have also risen. Anxiety and depression are going through the roof. And with them, we're going to see a lot of drug and alcohol addiction, and of course, a sharp rise in suicides. Yeah, those memes about drinking at 10 a.m. are going to become a lot less funny soon. And let's not forget some of the other social consequences of this, were the only ways that some kids were able to eat. And on top of that, domestic abuse is slated to also skyrocket because victims are now trapped at home with their abusers. And we're already starting to see a rise in these things. Depression is treatable, though. I know that for sure. In-person therapy is perhaps the best thing for it. Too bad in this current situation, it is impossible. But there are some treatments you can do on your own time. For example, getting exercise. Too bad people can't go to the gym and are getting harassed by police for going into their local park. I mean, just going outside can do wonders for one's mood. Oops, lockdown. Honestly, in my experience though, the last thing that you want to do for depression is sit at home and just do nothing. It makes depression worse. Oh wait! Well, keep a consistent sleep schedule, which is hard to do without a consistent everything else schedule. Eat right! Oh, that's right, canned and non-perishable food lasts longer. It's usually less healthy though. But at this point, you get what you can get. Well, one silver bullet for depression can be a visit with friends or family. Oh wait, gonna be a real hard time for some people. This is just one of the things that I mean by short-sighted. Just keep in mind that the elderly commit suicide at a larger rate than young people. People 45 and older are much more likely to commit suicide than people who are younger than 45. And that is just one consequence of lockdown. Grandma might not die of COVID, but with her savings all dried up, she might pull the trigger. You've probably heard about the urging to restart the economy. This has actually led to the most disgust for people with me. And no, I'm not talking about the people who want to restart the economy, ironically enough. No, the people who think that the economy is just rich people problems and think that anyone who does want to restart the economy wants Grandpa to die. Well, sorry, Grandpa was 2 years to retirement, and if everything goes belly up, everything he saved for his entire life will be worth nothing. The economy is not stocks and bonds and the margin of profit that rich people get. I mean, it is that, but it's more than that. The economy is whether or not you have a job, whether or not the stuff you buy is affordable, and whether or not you're able to eat. So, it's been stated that for every 1 point rise in unemployment, that's between 37,000 and 40,000 deaths, between suicides, homelessness, drug overdoses, and all that good stuff. So that's just 3 points of unemployment, and that's more than the current amount of COVID deaths worldwide so far. If this lockdown goes on too long, you might be looking at a 32% unemployment rate, 1/3 of Americans out of a job, and things like food banks, which are already being strained, running out of resources. If the math all adds up, that's over 1 million deaths. Oh, and that's not all! That includes a substantially worse quality of life for everyone who has survived. Oh, and believe it or not, it's not really the big rich people and the corporations struggling to get the economy open right now. It's the middle class people who are going to be screwed if it doesn't. The rich people are probably going to be fine no matter what. In fact, a lot of these big corporations are doing really, really well right now because they have no competition from the smaller mom and pop shops. Currently, and this isn't theoretical, this is actual stats and stuff that's actually already happened. 1 in 10 small businesses is not opening again when all of this is over. 6.6 million people right now are trying to get benefits. And that's the people who could access the website here in the United States. Not all of them are getting off of unemployment when all of this is over. The Postal Service is slated to be out of money by November. And yeah, the federal government could give them more money to keep them afloat, but they can't keep everything afloat. We do not have the resources for that kind of stuff. I mean, they could keep printing money, but that adds resources like plugging a power strip into itself provides power. Every dollar you print makes every other dollar less valuable. As more money gets printed, people's savings get eaten up as inflation rises. We've seen what hyperinflation does in Zimbabwe and in Germany after World War I. It's not pretty, and it leads to very not pretty things. I have no idea why basic economics is not mandatory in American schools or in schools anywhere. I keep hearing people use the situation to try and push ideas like Medicare for all. Except giving everyone access to medicine doesn't make it so there are magically more ventilators or a vaccine magically appears from the sky. In fact, it could honestly be the opposite. That could have put us in a worse situation than we are now. We've actually overproduced ventilators now to try and meet the demand, but we could have had less of them to begin with if we put all of our resources into diseases that more people had before the pandemic. Not to mention, more people would think that they were entitled to healthcare, and they would probably overwhelm the hospitals even quicker. Then there are people saying that the eventual vaccine should be free. Alright, well, someone is going to need to pay for the raw materials, someone's going to need to pay for its production, and of course, I suppose you're going to say that the heroes trying to create one don't deserve a damn dime for their efforts. Economics 101 is about supply and demand, which people, by and large, don't seem to understand anymore. We do not have an infinite supply of anything. We do got a lot of stuff, but it isn't by any means infinite. And in cases that we have been seeing, a lot isn't enough for everyone. Countries with more universal healthcare are having a ton of problems. That isn't a magic bullet that would have made this all okay. We do not live in a utopia. Thank you for finally noticing. And looking for the utopian option is the fastest way of getting people hurt and killed. Normally, I really don't like to get this political, but as I said, I'm very annoyed, and I'm probably going to care less and less what people think of what I have to say from here on out. I'm also very tired. Healthcare is not a human right, at least not in the same way that speech is. No matter what, someone cannot magically produce me a vaccine and cure me if I fall ill, unlike speech, which is always available to me. No one gives me speech. No one gives me the right to defend myself. That's why these are rights. In order to prevent myself from dying, someone has to provide me with a service. And I believe that if somebody prevents me from dying, they should be compensated for that service. And don't say that public taxes are something that could pay for it. That's exactly how insurance works, pooling everyone's money to pay for treatment, and it works so well. And to talk about other people's politics, people are saying that capitalism can't stand up to a situation like this, and that means that capitalism is bad. That's a terrible argument. That's the worst anti-capitalist argument that I've ever heard. I mean, my house is structurally sound, and it works pretty well. I'd call it a good house. But if a bomb blew it up, it'd probably go down. That doesn't mean that the house is bad. No system is prepared for every eventuality. Back to economics, though. Many other countries rely on the United States economy. The Great Depression back in the 1930s started here and echoed across much of the rest of the world because the United States is such a big trading partner. An economic issue of this scale will cause massive civil unrest and may even spark civil wars. So please, have a little understanding when people begin saying, "This isn't fucking worth it, I'm going outside." Yes, it's very possible that I will get sick. It's very possible that most will get sick. If a vaccine takes too long or isn't possible, this is going to be a reality that we are faced with. And the countries that didn't lock down or relied on herd immunity may be better off in the long run. I am thoroughly convinced that most people are going to catch this eventually, because as time goes on, the alternative is looking worse and worse. When the food shortages start at this rate, and they will start, civil unrest is sure to follow. So let's talk to the doomers. So one of the groups of people that I've been most annoyed at is the doomers. If you don't know, doomer is a term that has been applied to people who are running around with like chickens with their heads cut off, who want to contemplate suicide because they coughed into their own fridge, and who think that causing all of society to collapse is worth saving the life of even one person, even if that one person would be only living 3 years longer anyway. The disease itself is not going to be the end of humanity. If you catch it, you are most likely not going to die. In many cases, it is asymptomatic. And no, that isn't just its incubation period. Some people have COVID and never show symptoms ever, or they show symptoms so mild that it's not worth reporting or caring about. The numbers look bad in some cases because many people do not feel sick enough to go to the hospital. This means that the case total is a lot higher, but the death percentage and the hospitalization percentages are much lower. Wash your hands, don't touch your face, and take basic precautions. That is good things to do. If you are not elderly and not immunocompromised, this most likely will not kill you. Let me make it clear, if you are not in those two categories, you will most likely get out of this okay. Of course, if you do get sick, avoid people who would be the most vulnerable to it. It is common sense stuff. You have to remember, this virus is not a death sentence. If you want to know what else you can do to help your chances, most of the people who do get hospitalized are obese. If that describes you, that'd be something to work on. If you smoke anything, not just cigarettes, anything, this includes marijuana, now is a good time to quit. Eat right and sleep right, and physically, you should be fine. Mentally, I would highly recommend you stop being obsessed over the news. Watching the news all day will make you paranoid, and that's when the world is normal. Speaking of that, stop calling this the new normal, or whatever we're walking into, the new normal. That's defeatist thinking. You're better than that. Let me put it like this. Back in February, all the news sources were saying that this was just the flu, and you shouldn't be worried about it at all. Influenza is deadlier. They were wrong back then, but who's to say that they're not going too far in the other direction now? Remember, getting eyes glued to the screen is how they make their money, and the easiest way to do that is to enrage you or to terrify you. Try cutting out the news for at least 1 or 2 days a week. You'll feel a hell of a lot better, I can guarantee you on that. Yes, there are anecdotes of 20-year-olds or younger dying to this. There are anecdotes of children dying during tonsillectomies. People die during routine surgeries. You're always going to find extreme cases or flukes. Chances are you are not going to be one of them. Remember, anxiety is something that is incredibly dangerous in and of itself. It makes people irrational and stupid, and during the situation, that's the last thing that you want to be. Self-care is more important now than it has ever been before. We will see the sunrise again. The desire to have someone do something, anything, in such a situation, in a knee-jerk reaction, leads to more pain and suffering in the long run. 9/11 gave us what? The TSA, the NSA, the Patriot Act, and 2 wars that are still ongoing to this day, all of which were demanded by the general public, because the general public was scared of an imminent threat. Wanting to stay in lockdown until a vaccine comes along is almost as illogical as attacking 5G towers. Although staying in lockdown that long is actually a hell of a lot less feasible. I honestly feel that the measures we took to prevent a COVID apocalypse will be seen as a great mistake in history. One of the more popular measures taken was curfews. Because that'll prevent a pandemic. Because as we all know, the coronavirus is nocturnal. It gets very, very sleepy when the sun rises, and it doesn't infect anyone during the daytime, squeezing all of the people into the smallest window of time possible. I mean, I don't have a doctorate in epidemiology, but I can't see how that will help prevent the spread of the virus. Curfews do nothing to prevent pandemic. I can easily argue the opposite. The curfews help spread pandemic. It's the same with only allowing certain stores open, putting everyone in the same place at the same time. Those kind of measures make a lockdown almost pointless. Either a container is airtight or it's not. But I mean, if your sole focus is to stop or slow the spread of disease, you can definitely choose to avoid everything else. It's kind of like preventing cavities by not eating anything at all until you starve to death. I mean, that's the kind of solution that we found ourselves in. Honestly, the comparison is too perfect. Staying in lockdown until the virus is eradicated is exactly like not eating any food to prevent cavities. Both of them are going to end with people starving to death. I mean, that seems to be the kind of solution that people are asking for. And solutions going forward seem to be even worse. I've heard people talk about mandatory vaccines in their panic. Well, with the anti-vaxxer movement, I've heard this one come up a lot in recent years, but it's at the forefront now. And it is a terrible idea. To put it bluntly, mandatory vaccines are a human rights abuse, and every dictator in history would love to have something like that. Honestly, my frustrations with short-sighted people have been bubbling for a very long time now, and this is just the apex of it. But let me put it like this. A government that injected pregnant women with plutonium to see what would happen, that hired a service which unknowingly gave LSD to college students, in an environment where it was legally allowed and encouraged to forcibly sterilize mentally handicapped people up until the 1970s, with a medical apparatus that propagated Tuskegee, in a place where lobotomies were the established science, which had such a great eugenics program that Hitler wrote a love letter to it, does not get the right to mandate something like forced injections. Ever. No matter how annoying Karen is on Facebook. I don't care if the people or institutions have changed over times. And I can come up with countless examples from pretty much every other country in the world. No one gets the right to do this anymore. Especially a vaccine that people want to fast track in their desperation. Look up thalidomide if you need another reason why mandating something like that is a bad idea. I'm sorry, but when the people at the top on this crisis, like Dr. Fauci, are recommending things like immunity cards, it proves counterintuitive and makes me want to not take any of this seriously, because it makes the cure far worse than disease. It makes me think that you've all lost your minds, that you haven't been eating or sleeping well, you're turning into a Dr. House, which the human is irrelevant to the disease, that you've got some kind of hero complex, or you're starting to play God. I mean, there's a ton of stupidity that I've seen on the forums. People have recently taken to saying that the government here in the US should have taken more precautions earlier. They should have done all those lockdown stuffs in February. Right, because that would have gone over beautifully. You know, considering the World Health Organization didn't declare it a pandemic until the middle of March. An unpopular administration restricting travel around the world, demanding everyone to stay in their houses when the WHO said that person-to-person transmission didn't happen, and the media saying that it was just the flu, all while decrying that the current China travel ban was racist. I mean, coronavirus was such a big deal in February that Italy had a Hug a Chinese Day to curb racism and the rising worry out of the situation. I guarantee it that every single person demanding sooner actions would have revolted if they got exactly what they are asking for now when it was opportune to do this. After all, the WHO condemned travel restrictions, stating that they were unnecessary, and now people are angry that the US defunded them. The WHO has been wrong every step of the way on this. From their bullshit about saying person-to-person transmission was unlikely to happen, to their BS statement on masks. Oh, what's that, WHO? Cats and dogs cannot transmit the disease? Okay. Oh, wait, what's that? Only cats can? Oh, no, wait, cats and dogs both can. And I'm not even gonna talk about their whole issue with Taiwan. But seriously, the spokesman is a real-life person, not a cartoon character who thought that the I'm breaking up, we're going through a tunnel would actually work in real life. It's gonna be the funniest comedy movie of all time in a few years, I guarantee that. People scare me more than any disease pandemic could. A virus is rational. What it does makes sense. You can predict it. And honestly, nature itself encourages the virus to be better. The less deadly that COVID becomes through mutation, the better it is for COVID's own survival. Killing people is counterintuitive for the virus's survival. For the same reason, blowing up your own house is counterintuitive to your own survival. This is how many pandemics snuff themselves out. Nature does the work for us. The less deadly the virus is, the better it is for the virus. It's natural selection in work. Panicking people, though, what they do makes no logical sense. And in a way, it attacks all logic, and it is more likely to get everyone hurt. I want to believe that cooler heads will prevail on this one. My faith in humanity is largely at stake on this one. In a month, when the lockdowns are loosened or people start rioting, I'll let you know if I'm a misanthrope. Oh, and let me be very clear. Those are the only two options available. I guarantee you that one or the other is going to happen. Or I guess there is a third option. People start starving to death because no one can buy food anymore. Or grow it because, seeds are non-essential. But my opinion on society hasn't sunk quite that low yet. Please do not prove me wrong.